Thank you guys all for being here. We've got a quick announcement before we start the panel, and that announcement is that the sign-up sheet for the talent show this evening is actually over there on the side. So just to remind everybody that it's at 8 o'clock. It's going to be in the room right next door. We're actually very fortunate. Merida was just telling us we're actually going to have a stage and everything, so it's going to be really very cool. We want to make sure, Lainie was telling me, that we get adults and kids also doing their talent. So it's not just a kid show.
We have both rooms, actually.
Oh,
so this room and that room, the wall will be separated. So if we have time afterwards, if you guys want to boogie, you can dance.
Oh, very cool. Makes it all that much more fun. More talent yet. So that's for announcements. Now, as for our panel today, what we're going to be talking about is participation in service for global citizenship. Okay, so a lot of what we're going to talk about is the fact of travel, how we intermingle with local communities, what we can give back. And so before we do that, what I'd like to ask the panelists is each of you guys to introduce yourselves and just speak to what this title says for you and what you just off the top have already done perhaps, so we can start to get going on that. Anybody want to start? And we'll start with Lainie because she's closest.
Okay, so you guys know me. The way that when Miro and I first started traveling, part of our goal initially was to incorporate service into it. And so we volunteered every country that we went to. That was our mission. And as we got more and more involved in the alternative education movement, we decided that volunteering with children in schools wasn't a fit for us. So a lot of the things that we were...
Can't hear you.
Hello?
There we go.
Hello.
Wow.
All right, I'll start. We really have to talk into the top of this thing. So I guess I'll repeat that. When Miro and I first got started traveling, we had decided that we were going to incorporate service into what we were doing because we were very conscious about giving meaning to our travel. So every country we went to, we volunteered. So we worked with, like in Nicaragua, we worked in an animal, dog, animal spaying and neutering. We worked in triage. Here's a little 10-year-old Miro, like helping them with the sutures. And this was a makeshift clinic in Nicaragua. And I was working triage, and just petting the animals when they were coming out of the anesthetic. So things like that. We worked with rescued sloths. We did a lot of work with animals and a lot of work. In the beginning, we did a little bit of work with kids, and then eventually, what I was saying before is, the more that we got involved in alternative education and the idea of natural learning, we decided that working with kids in schools was not a fit for us because we weren't really supportive of the school system in general, and it just didn't feel like something that we wanted to contribute to, even though we knew clearly there was a need. Now, we've been producing retreats for Project World School. We're on our 5th year now. And every single retreat that we produce, we incorporate at least 1 or 2 days of service. Last year, here in Mexico, we had 4 days of service in 2 different agencies that we performed service with. But throughout the years, with the Project World School, with the retreats, we've built walls, we built a house, we have also worked in another animal clinic, we worked with the sea turtles, we worked with the whales, the Pacific Whale Foundation is one of our days of service. We have a huge span of service-oriented things that we have done over the years with the Project World School retreats as well. So as our travel shifted a little bit, it wasn't just about us, it was about us facilitating the retreats for teens in different places in the world. We continued that need or desire to give back and really contribute to the places that we were visiting to as an honor. So that's it.
My name's Joan, Ruffles. So I guess I've been thinking about this topic and wanted to ask people to think about before you're traveling, are you volunteering at home? What are you doing? How engaged are you in the community? How participatory are you and your children? Were you participatory before you had children? So those questions I just posed to you. You bring your life where you go. And if you were participating in community and service before you left, like you continue that on your travels, which is what my situation is. So, I mean, it's just a part of who we are and how we live our lives. So, I mean, I can't tell you how many things we volunteer in and how much we participate in community service. And it's part of our identity. And I don't like to look at it so much as contributing, but more as a partnership, especially in different countries that we're in. We're in a new country. I like to be in the community in a new country and see where we can pitch in and just be part of the community like we are at home. So that's brought us to working with street children. That's brought us to, specifically my girls are really, really interested in the environment and endangered species. They started a nonprofit when they were little kids for that effort, and that's continued. So it's just, there's always a place to pitch in. I've started doing the yoga retreats. I couldn't do that without incorporating in a service component. So I worked with pregnant women at the health clinic. I did yoga. It's just like, of course, like I'm not going to be in this country and not do something. So there's always something you can do, and you always have a skill to offer or put it out there. And we also just went, I asked the people who came on the retreat to bring books, and we went to a school and we read stories. And one of the women was practicing her storytelling, and she just did that with a group of kids. And it was great. We've started libraries. We like to promote literacy. Children, this always comes up, what can kids do? Kids can collect books. You can always, there's always a way for the kids to pitch in. Language is a great other opportunity, just talking. People want to practice their English. Like, we want to practice our Spanish and stuff. Other people want to practice their English. So just chatting with your kids can chat with other kids and play. And that's a way to be a contributor and real, and in the community. So that's, I guess, my little story.
Hi, I'm Crystal. I hate microphones. Even when I taught in America at university, I never used them. So I'm Crystal, and I have the Conscious Travel Adventure Company, Enlightened Globe Trekker Adventures. This is formed off of my background, of my foundation. I'm a cultural anthropologist, which means I work with human cultures. So my values that I have, and that I have done this in order to pass on to my daughter, are all about cultural equality and social justice and human rights, the human experience. So on our travels, that's always incorporated in everything. She has her own projects, and it's to affect children at the children age. To grow up with this in their hearts and minds is very, very important for humanity in general. So that's something that I work on in my little family, as well as now having retreats around the world that are a mix of yoga, adventure, and also humanitarian service. And that's for so many reasons. One is that when we are traveling to a country, we are taking away from that country a little bit. And so I think it's our right to give back. There's always a need, no matter what country you're in, no matter what's going on, if there's a crisis there or not. There's always something you can do. Take a day or take some time out of out of your schedule and in your heart and find out what's there, what you can do, whether you can bring supplies or help out. So we do all kinds of different projects. We actually have a volunteer program in Nepal helping to rebuild and support a village that was destroyed in the earthquakes. And Melissa is here actually, and she participated in that program last year. So if anyone's interested, let me know. We do everything there from building toilets to teaching at the school to, these villages need every single thing from moving the rubble from the earthquakes that are still, their houses are in rubble and they're living in tents. So we help with everything from, there's just the complete spectrum in these kind of areas that we go to that they need. So that's kind of on a different level than visiting a school and bringing supplies and stuff like that. But it depends on what country you're in and what this area you're in and what the need is, so you can tap into what's going on in that particular area. But as far as reaching a level of immersion and helping a country, a culture, you really connect in a different level when you're engaging in this level of life experience. Also for yourself as well as the children, seeing that they are humans too, and they're in need, and we are all one family, and it's our duty to help. We have so much, and so I try to spread that around for people to come, get out of their box, get out of their house and their perfect, gate and stuff. And we do have so much. We are so blessed. We can give back a lot if we just make the space in our heart. So raising the children like that, I think is priceless. I'm really trying to do that with River and with the groups that I work with. Other things we've done are River gives her things in each country. We have a world tour every year of 15 countries for work. This is a combination of my work and my retreats, but also our personal travel. So she leaves items that she doesn't use anymore, but in each country when we leave, we always have lots of stuff, and I tell her to choose her 5 favorite things that she's been using this week or this trip or this country, whatever, things she's bought or anything that she's used, and we leave that for whoever. In Greece, we worked with the refugees. We gave them the little girls' dolls, and River went and she was able to hand it to them personally. So seeing that interaction with the little girl from this country looks like this, and she gets the doll, and this is not something that you don't care about anymore, you don't play with anymore, but you're giving your favorite thing that's a piece of your heart, sharing that love that's inside that toy and that money or whatever it is, and sharing that around the world. So it's a huge, huge part of our life. It fulfills me and her, and it helps along our path. There's so much more that can be done, but I do my part. So any questions you have, again, I won't be here tomorrow, so anything you have to ask about, just please find me later today. We would love to have you come help, or if not, on one of my trips, please make sure you wire this into your family, because it's a really great bonding experience as well, no matter where you are in the world, even at home. So it's really important for humanity, for the next generation.
Well, that's a hard one to follow. I'm George Kaponay. I'm one of a family of 4. We've been travelling, going on 6 years now, and when we started our journey, when we actually left Australia, because we travelled around Australia for a year before we left, we had the seed of an idea that maybe all needs on the planet could be met. And basically around that we formed a project that we wanted to take out to the world, and we named that Energetic Exchange. And it was in this vein where, we've all got something to give, and everybody needs things, and there's basically somebody on the planet that could fulfill that need. And having come in my prior life working in the IT world, I thought, wow, we could do this through a website, and where we could you could come and input something where you have something that you need and something that you can also offer, and this little engine would match you together. So someone, you might offer somebody something that they need, but they needn't give it back to you because somewhere along in the path or the universe or whatever, their needs would also be met. So we self-funded this project based on just the little amount that we had left after we sold everything, and in 2012 we left Australia to travel to the US, and because we thought after the global crisis there'd be lots of need there, and we basically got in an RV and travelled from community to community, place to place, to see if we could actually build community around this idea of energetic exchange. And we rapidly found out that there really wasn't much interest, and our focus, we tried to make it on a global sort of basis where we learnt over the time and over the course that things like this are much more successful done on that local community level when you can bring communities together. And for us, we didn't feel defeated by the non-success of the idea. In fact, it was sort of an impetus for something else for us on this journey of learning and discovery, and that we discovered that what we're doing and what we were doing together as a family, and we were living this as a meaningful life. It was meaningful to us because when I looked back at what I did before that, yes, I was earning good money and all of those sorts of things, but it had little meaning to us, and it gave very little back to the world. And as we travelled through the years, we started to realise that with the people we met and the places we stayed in, and as Lainie said, we also do slow travel, so we immerse ourselves in the culture and the place. We also immersed ourselves and participated in the communities. And most recently, our daughter, who's written a book, and we're on the book tour of that, we found ourselves going from community to community in North America, throughout Canada and the US. And it's funny how it drew us back after 4 years, and we could see that there was a great need, for, because this panel is also about global citizenry and all of those sorts of things, about how people could live a meaningful life together as a family, and even see the world and experience cultures and do those sorts of things. And we found every place we went, we were always being asked the question, how can you live like this? And it always drew the topic of the conversation deeper into the meaning of why we're living and what we're doing and how we're doing it. And that's become a very important aspect for us in service to others, because we feel we could, through the experiences that we're living and what we're doing, maybe we can touch other people's lives and share in planting a seed that it is really, really a possibility for you to get out there, to explore the world, to contribute to other cultures. And, having come from a developed country, it's also really important for us as a family not to exploit that culture that we're in. I know we all have to live and we all have to make money and all of those sorts of things, but the thing here is it's very important to us also to have a grounded approach as to how we relate to others and how we can contribute back to the places that we are in a meaningful way. So it basically comes around that, and this is a seed idea that's evolving as I'm talking about it now, but we're finding that we're touching many people's lives, and it's very enriching, even for us. This is the greatest enriching experience for us, to be able to show people that, yes, you don't have to keep living the way you're living in the Western world or whatever, or in a sedentary type lifestyle. There are other opportunities, and you can travel and see the world and contribute to it in a meaningful way. So that sort of sums up what we're doing at the moment.
Hi, I'm Jen Silver. I think a lot of you heard at least part of my story during the community speech presentation the first day, but I'll go over it briefly. I try to incorporate service into every area of my life, from personal friendships and family, and also professionally. And the reason for that is just that I spent my early childhood in a very white bread, privileged suburbia in the Midwest. And then when my parents divorced, my mom wanted to go to law school, and so she took us to inner city Indianapolis. So she was raising 3 kids, putting herself through law school, and working full-time. And the only way she could manage that is basically to have it all be in the same neighborhood. And the law school was downtown. So we moved right into a neighborhood that actually has the highest per capita murder rate in the country. So here I came from, a world of sheltered privilege and just got thrown into the mix. And got past that initial fear of the unknown into, hey, these are wonderful people. And, really for the most part, they're here because of systemic racism and oppression, and they're all great people. And if they had more knowledge and opportunity, they wouldn't be here either. So that was my first seed of like, okay, well, I want to be that person then that helps give them that knowledge and opportunity, So I wanted, number one, to get myself out of that situation. But as soon as I did, it was a high priority to turn around and give that hand up to everyone else who deserved to exit that situation as well. So I got involved in sales and marketing. I got into it for my own personal reasons to be able to support myself, but also very rapidly turned that around to teaching other people business, teaching other people entrepreneurship, teaching other people financial literacy so that they could start to make those decisions and get away from sort of magical thinking, I belong here, into concrete steps that could change their life. So that's what I did professionally. And then also when I worked in high tech, I consider it service what we did in high tech. We were involved very early on in setting up stock option programs for companies in order to get that wealth that's up at the higher executive level down into the people, down into the employee level, and also encouraging people to become entrepreneurs, because that's where the power is in owning your own business. As we all are seeing, that's a big deal in creating freedom in your own life. So that's just professionally how I consider service. I am particularly focused on helping women in business, just because that's dear to my heart, and helping children. So in addition to the professional, we've started some nonprofits. When my daughter was 8, there have been times where we've been traveling, I guess, about 8 years, and there have been times where we've slow traveled enough that we've put the kids into school. And we were just shocked to be in, a fairly posh neighborhood that should have had schools that were the best of the best, right? But even there, they were slashing funding for arts and everything so much that it just didn't exist. There was no music class, no art class. And that was just appalling and shocking to us. So we started a nonprofit and helped schools raise, thousands of dollars all over the country. We would sell products that you had to, school supplies you had to buy anyway, arts and crafts and Crayola, and partnered with companies like, educational toy companies, and then a portion of whatever you purchased would go to your school. And we would set up cultural field trips, basically. So, like, if we got to go, take a group of schools to go see the Lion King, and then they got to go backstage and they got to touch all the puppets, and they make it a world schooling experience even for these kids that were stuck in their school. But like Lainie said, then we rapidly, as we grew away from ever, wanting much to do with the school system, we began volunteering in other ways. And even before that, because when I was in middle school, one of the things that I think saved me and set me on a better path was there was a group called Girls Inc., and they target that right around age 12 is when girls start to fall behind in science and math, and they get that self-esteem issues, and they start focusing more on boys. Not that all genders don't have challenges at that age, but they came and they found me and another group of kids, and they identified us, and they taught us about technology, and I credit that a lot for putting me on a path that then got into business and got into technology specifically, and so I wanted to pay that back, pay it forward, and so I became a science and technology teacher for them on a volunteer basis in Oakland, and went back and found, 4th grade to 8th grade girls, and, identified those that were interested in escaping and being more and learning, these skills. So that was really rewarding. And then just I'll talk quickly on our worldschooling travels. We've done everything from volunteering with refugees, and I'm always happy to give you guys specific tips for how we find these opportunities. But Facebook is one way. Before this has to do with community as well. Before I get to any place I know we're going to go, I start. Even on the World Schoolers group, I go to the World Schoolers group. I go to the little search bar. I type in the country that I'm going to go to, and then I reach out to those people, both personally to say, hey, can we get together, but also to say, hey, do you know of any good, reputable organizations? Because especially as you get to, third world countries, it can be opportunistic where people they know, like, oh, if I start an NGO, there might be some donations that flow in, so maybe finding the right ones. But we've also, even though we're atheists, and that's a part of our identity, is that we also want to be ambassadors for atheism, because there's still that stigma of, oh, how can you be good if you're not in a church? And just showing, well, you're good because it's the right thing to do. And so even though we are atheists and we find, ways to serve that are secular, we are not afraid to also reach out to churches and other spiritual organizations and to see if they have opportunities for children, because honestly it's fairly easy to find things that adults can volunteer for, but for liability issues in some countries it can be hard with kids. But churches do often have either whether it's a food bank or things like that you can participate with, or they will at least, they kind of know who the other players in that town are. So if you're ever looking for a way to find something good to do, chances are if you call the local church or synagogue or whatever, they're at least going to have some ideas or resources for you. And yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of my background so that I can preface why I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to be a bit of a bum here and be a bit of a devil's advocate. I'm actually, as I said earlier, originally Mexican, and we moved up to Canada to live when I was 8. And that transition wasn't necessarily easy or smooth. And so it's given me a perspective where, while I can pass, because if I present myself as a Canadian, nobody's going to guess me otherwise, in Mexico, it gives me the opportunity of presenting myself as Mexican or as foreigners. And in Canada, it lets me the privilege, and it is a privilege, to be able to see both sides of that coin. And sometimes I see stuff that I think others don't necessarily see. So I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate. I also studied international development work, and I've done 2 years of service in Papua New Guinea. I've done human rights work. I've worked with Mohawks in Canada. I've done pretty heavy-duty human rights work in Mexico. One of the things that we learn in international development studies is that and it's very interesting because it's very similar to the respectful, trustful parenting perspective that we're talking about, is how do you actually know when you're going somewhere and volunteering that volunteering is actually requested, required, and appreciated? Because that's often a very tricky trick. In fact, one of my anthropology professors, being, I guess, as cheeky as this question is, had on her door a thing that said, anthropology is a study of those browner and shorter than you. And sometimes when we go to other countries, that makes for a tricky place to, we're trying to be of service, we're trying to do good, we're trying to bring something positive in the world, but sometimes the way those communities see us, the way they appreciate us, or as you said with the NGOs, sometimes the community itself will say, oh, we can get something out of her, and it's not necessarily fulfilling the community's real needs. So I'd like to see if any of you guys have some opinions to that.
Yeah, I can certainly respond to that. So Miro and I lived in Cusco for 3 years, and it gave us an opportunity to really immerse ourselves into the culture. And during that time, we met so many gringos that came to spend a short period of time and to volunteer. And there was a woman that I met who was also doing her PhD. She was from Canada, and she was studying the phenomenon of volunteering and what that was doing to the culture. And so I actually interviewed her about 4 or 5 years ago, and I could put the link on the Facebook page. But what she said to me was, the people that are in need here in Cusco are becoming more in need because of the reliance of that kind of symbiotic relationship. And yes, there is a need. There is a need, especially in Cusco, and I'm just speaking very locally, and she talked about, well, one of the big problems there is abuse against single mothers and rape. Okay, what can you do about that? Well, that's not sexy, really, for gringos to come and roll up their sleeves and not have that kind of service-oriented psychology background, anthropology background training. They can't do that. But what they can do is go work in a school and take pictures with little village kids, right? What they can do is go teach English. And that kind of relationship and that kind of service wasn't doing the community any good. So we're really, I don't have an answer to your question, but what I can do is say that we have explored that as a problem. When we make decisions about where we're volunteering, having that kind of awareness leads us really to volunteering mostly with animals. And I can't say that it's a solution to this problem, but I'm saying it's one way that we have consciously been aware of this issue and wanted from our hearts to give and contribute. And that was one way that we felt good about doing that. And let's get clear, Miro talked about why we volunteer. We volunteer because doing service makes us feel good. So it's about us. And once we can recognize that there's a selfish need, whether it's good or bad, however you want to qualify that, that's the motivation. So we have, I believe, as volunteers and families, the responsibility to really check out whether or not, if we're volunteering with other human beings and their lives, really what is that about?
I think the key to this is slow travel, immersing yourself into the culture and entering into that culture with no agenda. And you find out where people are at, what's going on. Are women being abused? Do they even know what that means? Do they know that they're entitled to not being abused? So this is a really important topic. It happens a lot in developing countries. Women are abused. So I work with a group of women, training them on what that means, and that they're learning to feel valued, and that and actually what happened is then they started talking with other women, and they started talking with other women, and they started to begin to feel valued. Value doesn't mean your husband or your partner or whatever, your boyfriend that you're with because he's buying groceries for you because you're so poor you don't have food to feed your children. You don't deserve to be abused. And anyway, I just saw this. How would I have known going into that community that this was a relevant topic, you know? Another thing is kind of scaling, and I'm thinking so much about Paul and his presentation on scaling. My daughter wrote a curriculum for environmental awareness. So instead of going there and working on the beach with the sea turtles, her vision was bigger than that. She wrote a curriculum to teach other kids how to be aware and teach other kids how to be aware and learn. I mean, she was like 16, 17 when she wrote this, but she saw a need for youth becoming leaders in environmental awareness. So I think that's because we saw sea turtles being eaten, and stuff like that, and that really bothered her. So she wanted to do something more than just guard the sea turtle nest. So this is what she did. So if you're in the community and you see what's happening, slow travel is the key to this. You can't think you're going to pop in for 2 weeks and have a solution that you're going to offer people. It's very arrogant and ethnocentric on the part of people coming from first world countries. So that's my 2 cents.
Beautiful. And I'd actually like to give the mic to Jen on this, because we were talking beforehand about the possibility of maybe, and I was talking to Lainie about this, sometimes when we volunteer at home with communities that are close to our home countries, but that are either new immigrants or marginalized for some reason, this gives us a different viewpoint when we actually start going to those third world nations. And so I'd like to ask Jen to talk a little bit about that.
Well, as I said, I'll do my best to address it. So part of it is that my volunteering came out, like you said, of being in the community longer term, and so I could see and feel and, really talk to people about what they needed. So that's, I think, brilliant what you said about slow travel and not being ethnocentric and not just coming in for the photo op and, to pat yourself on the back or to have something on your college essay that you did to, be such a good, well-rounded applicant. So I'll say also, I'll kind of back out a little bit because I do have a business background, and so while I think at times just going by the hard numbers can lose the people, and so you don't want to rely on that exclusively, but also having that macroeconomic view so that you have a sense of what the pressures the community are under and what the impact that your volunteering is having on the big picture level. Really, for me, is one way that I try to approach it if I'm going somewhere that I don't have the time or knowledge to really be there. That's kind of, I'll do my studies ahead of time to hope that the impacts are on the whole going to result in something positive rather than something reliant or something that is incentivizing them to be shady. If you're coming in and you're coming in with money and you're coming in with and you don't fully understand the way that community is working, your money might flow to people who aren't necessarily using it in ethically sound ways. The other side of that coin, though, is so I kind of split my service into two ways. Like I do it, when I'm actually serving and I'm out there volunteering, but then I also do a lot of fundraising and, business, and that's where I've worked with my kids on awareness. So there's service that we do even when we're not, like after the earthquake in Haiti. Like, okay, we didn't fly down to Haiti, and part of why we didn't was consciously because a lot of white people were getting in the way. You can't just imagine that your presence is going to be the solution unless you have these specific skills that they need right then. You might be more benefit staying home and raising money and then identifying who does have the time and knowledge to be there longer term and provide that sustainable solution. So when I do that sort of service, I'm just with my kids. We're doing bake sales. We're raising awareness, like you said. We're teaching others. We're creating the funds to then hand off to the people who know what to do with it sustainably and ethically. Because we don't know everything about everywhere we want to help. But when I do go in and try to help, I try to have that knowledge of the bigger picture and the community and really what the issues are and how we can impact that has a sum gain overall.
This is an ethical issue always in anthropology. It's never really able to be answered. Even from, say, some cultures will practice female genital mutilation for their rite of passage. And to us, that's very disturbing. But for them, this is very important. And so we have this knowledge. Do we advise them of that? Do we try to make laws to put in place to protect their youth, or do we let them sort of, this is part of their culture, this is what they've done? So these kind of things are always very contested in anthropology.
Yeah, there's always
well, I just wanted to say, what we are doing in Nepal is also, we don't call it helping, but we call it supporting and trying to enable them to make changes, sustainable changes for the future so that they're helping themselves, basically, because, not because we're better or we're whatever, but we have access to a different level of education, and they don't, and so we do know things that we can help. We help with their sustainable agriculture, permaculture practices, because, say, last year they only grow strawberries, and the strawberries don't grow that year, so they have nothing to eat, and they have no money because they have no strawberries to sell. So now we go in and we make like a pond, and we incorporate some permaculture practices so that in a couple years they can be taking, a little bit better care of their land in a more efficient way for their families and for their own income. So we're not going in and saying, hey, but we're really engaged at the local activity with board meetings, with, the chief of the village and all the shaman and all this stuff. So it's very different in different places, but in our specific area of what we're doing in Nepal, when the earthquake happened, I know there was a rush of people and stuff, but we put our volunteer program in place about a year after, once we saw what the government was going to do with humanitarian aid organizations, dispersing funds, how they were going to rebuild and what was going to happen. And then the government actually didn't aid or hand out any international humanitarian aid in Nepal, so the villages were really struggling. They had no way to rebuild anything. So I sort of took on this village to try to do my part, and to try to help them to get up. So there is a need, and we do have a lot that we can offer. There is a fine line between all this stuff, but if you are able to long-term travel or setting up a program through a research background or something that you are actually very connected to them in a wholesome context, then you can get to the grassroots of their culture and their beliefs and try to just offer what you can from your heart to enable them to help themselves into the future. Because we do have access to some different information. Then they're very sheltered. They don't know any of this stuff, So it does help them. It helps them to have money and food.
Thank you. Actually, that's interesting because my next question was going to be this. When I was working in Papua New Guinea, we would actually go into the community without an agenda, and we would have ways to have the community set the agenda of the work that they wanted us to do. And so the particular technique that we were using were Boalian theater techniques, which is a Brazilian technique where you actually use theater and theater games in order to bring the community to express themselves in ways that aren't necessarily verbal. So in the matter of, for example, women's issues, there's things that in the community women can't verbalize, but when it's a game and it's theater, all of a sudden it can be put on the table. So this is a specific tool that I've used in the past to enter a community that I'm not a part of and actually solicit from the community the areas that they feel that they want work to be done or aid to be somehow given. And it's also a way to bypass the authorities of the community, because often the authorities will lead you in the direction that is of their interest, which isn't necessarily in the interest of the locals, of the rest of the people. So yes, the president of the village or whoever has one idea, but maybe the people, the women and particularly, which normally will be silenced, have a different need. So I was wondering if any of you have ever tried, or you have any specific ways that you actually get at what those needs might be, so that when you are volunteering, you're making sure to touch upon those.
Yeah, like I just said, in Nepal we have a sort of base person there, base manager, I guess, for this program, and she attends all of the board meetings and stuff. And this is a chance for the villagers attend these meetings, and they talk about what they want and what they need and what's going on in Nepali. And she speaks Nepali, and her boyfriend, actually fiance, they got engaged, is a villager, and he tries to help. He is one of the village leaders now. So anyway, it's all completely based on what their needs are. We would never ever say, you need whatever. It's all like, if they need this house rebuilt, okay, what is the priority of whose house do you want rebuilt first, because for what reason or whatever. And they incorporated some earth bag homes, so they were trying that, and that's because they wanted to do that. So we sort of like helped facilitate that. And so this is very good to mention, and the program in Nepal is very much based on what the community needs, and I think that's really important to keep in mind, because that's course, also the cultural immersion aspect too, you know.
Anybody else have any techniques you've used?
I'll say I like what you said about bypassing the authorities, because that's just my nature, first of all. But
That happens amongst us here.
but yeah, that is a really good point, because even when you go in, that it is like, you may think you're volunteering for one reason, and then when you're there, and that gets you in. That's your way to get in. Like if you just called the mayor of a town or something, or the principal of a school, in my case, and said, "Hey, I'd like to come and volunteer with your students who are hungry and being sexually abused," like, "Oh, we don't have a program for that," but not anymore. but if I come in and I say, "Hey, I'm coming to teach technology to your kids, your inner city kids," oh my gosh, this is going to make you look so good, isn't it? It's going to make people want to come to your school because you've got these extracurricular programs, and each new student you have at your school is going to provide you government funding. Then all of a sudden I have their attention. And then once I'm in there, I don't want to talk to him anymore. I want to talk to the girls that I'm mentoring. And that's how, when you've earned their trust and you've created the relationships, then you find out that they're hungry, then you find out that they're abused, then you find out that they don't have school supplies. And then you can start to address those needs and get in touch with those parents and get them to the correct resources that will do that. So, and then only just one other thing that is kind of about this and kind of about the last question, and I'll try to find it, but to your question about how do you get to those underlying needs, there was even a game, and I think it was put out by National Geographic, that was an interactive game where you were put in, some nondescript village, like some African village, and your goal was to help them, and you had to go and talk to each character in the village, and you learned a lot about how our ideas of what would fix things wouldn't work, and why. Like you might talk to one person who's the head chief, and he's like, "Yes, we need a new well dug," and then you talk to other people, and it's like, "Oh no, we believe there are spirits in that area of town. We're not going to use that well even if you spend all afternoon digging it," So the more you dig in, and so anyway, I'll try to find that resource, because for kids, that's how we try to create awareness for our kids, first of all, that they're not just going to show up and magically be these white angels that, solve these problems, that they're much more complex. And there's things that we don't even know we don't know until we get in there.
Beautiful.
I just wanted to add one quick thing based on what you just said. As I said, we lived in Peru for 3 years, and every year we visit a family on a farm. We bring our group of teens, and that's where we actually prepare the cuy. And this family is absolutely beautiful. They live in the traditional manner. One thing I learned from this family, this is a considerably wealthy family, meaning their whole family lives together. They've got a nice outdoor kitchen area, and then they've got small rooms surrounding the main dining area and kitchen area, which is all dirt floor, by the way. But they're all together, and they have a nice lot of land, and they're quite a wealthy family in their community. In Western perception, they're absolutely not what we consider wealthy, but their status in their village is quite wealthy. And one year, about 7 or 8 years ago, an NGO came through Peru, and they said, "Oh, look at all these poor people cooking in their outdoor stoves and getting smoke in their face. That's bad for you. Did you know that? That's bad for you. We're going to raise money and build you guys some stoves." So they went around to every kitchen in this village and built these new sort of outdoor stoves in their traditional kitchen areas. And they did it in such a way where the wood is, underneath, and there's no direct smoke inhalation. And now they have the 2 stoves side by side. Well, they don't use that stove that was built by the NGOs. So, there is this cultural traditions that are not taken into consideration when somebody from outside the community comes in and says, "You need this." So that's something to consider.
Thank you very much for that. I think that the world of development is littered with examples like that. I remember in Papua New Guinea there was a similar example with composting toilets. It was not culturally correct to be going up and be visible by the rest of the community that you were going to go up to the can, and so it was better to keep on going into the jungle. So yeah, no, that's a very good example. Now here's the thing, and I love that you guys have all acknowledged one way or another the fact that often we volunteer clearly for our own benefit in many ways, and it's part of what we want to give to the world, but in many ways it's about us, and it's very important to acknowledge that. It doesn't make it better or worse, but it does change the way we actually enter these communities. And so I want to ask you guys if in any of the volunteer positions that you've taken, you've actually ever had a situation where you've gone in, volunteered, done the work that you thought you were going to do, and had that work actually change you, and perhaps change what you now think of that particular volunteer position, or how you entered the next volunteer position that you took on, or if in some way it actually changed the way you live your life, and having that relationship between me going and helping the other, have the other somehow give something to me that has helped me in my life. And I'd love to hear examples about that.
I want to plug the mic. I mean, every single opportunity changes. I think all of us, whenever we're in there. But this kind of speaks to what Lainie said, to volunteering in ways other than helping people. So we, one of the ways we serve also is for the environment. We do beach cleanups and, turtle hatchings and releases, and just a numerous sort of environmental type of service projects wherever we go, and animal projects too with the SPCA, and we'll go in and clean the SPCA for them, things like that. But that definitely has changed how we live. I mean, when you're wading around in the ocean, cleaning up disgusting things floating around, you realize, like, oh gosh, I don't want to be contributing to this. You see the sea turtle firsthand that has the soda can, and we don't drink soda anyway, but those sort of little plastic decisions, all of the things in the U.S. that are now, we're becoming more aware of. Use your own bags, less plastic, more glass, reuse, upcycle, all of that. So that's just one way aside from people. And then, of course, I think every time, just what world schooling is about is when you meet someone face to face, you can't help but be changed. We're social animals, and so when you look someone in the eye, that old not taking photographs because it's part of your spirit. I mean, that's true. If you see someone face to face in the eye, you can't help but be changed. And so volunteering with, refugees in Greece, we're fairly liberal and have always supported immigration. But I also came from a Midwestern country that has a background in the military and know people who have that background. And so I definitely can see both perspectives. So that was important, seeing them firsthand. And then one last thing I would just say is one way that it's very much changed me to have come from the Midwest and a poorer background, and then to come from a very conservative area, and then live in a very progressive. I mean, we went from Midwest Indiana to Berkeley. I lived in Berkeley for years. So I would say that one way that I see it change me is that I feel that I am more kind and patient with people who are coming from these conservative backgrounds than I see from people who come from progressive backgrounds, and that's all they know, because everyone can be just as guilty of being in their own bubble. And so one example of that would be on Facebook. I maybe in my life I've unfriended 3 people. Ever. You have to be pretty darn abusive to me. It's not because I don't have boundaries either. It's because I really feel that technology is an amazing way for us to connect, and it doesn't have to be these face-to-face, building homes in other countries, even though that's absolutely necessary. It can be something that we serve in our everyday life when we get on Facebook, just providing a little bit more grace for people that think different. So that's something that has changed me personally, is how I interact with people who are from conservative backgrounds, letting more space for them to learn over the years, because otherwise, how will they?
I every time we travel, if we're traveling appropriately, we're affected. If we're not, there's a problem. So then, especially volunteering, I think it teaches tremendous gratitude and perspective and a connection to and knowledge of another culture, and a reminder that we're all one human race, and we're all in it for the same human experience. All these things are really easy lessons to be learned when you're volunteering or traveling at that engaged level. So for sure.
So what I've found is I know less and less. Like, there is such wisdom and knowledge out there that I learn. And I learn from the people living on the dirt, living in the place with the dirt floor. And there's so much knowledge and wisdom that people want to share. Everyone. It's not us going to a culture. It's those people in the culture want to share with us. And they have such knowledge. And so I am like so humble. Like the older I get and everything, the less I know, the less I feel I know. I want to soak up the knowledge from other people who live in a really different way than I do. And also what I found is everybody wants to be of service. It's not the privileged people going into a developing country. It's the people within the developing country who also want to who do have tools and skills and knowledge to share with others. In certain cultures I found maybe it's teaching them how to share their knowledge with one another, because there's always like the grandma that you go to for for the certain tea or tea for if your elbow's hurting or something like that. But just in general, like sometimes people are very, very humble, I found. Like, Americans aren't always so humble. Like, we think we have the answers. But I found in other cultures they're a little more timid to acknowledge their knowledge and skills. And that it's okay to share with one another and with, us. So that's something that's completely changed in my life. Yeah.
Now, I like the fact also that you guys have all focused on long stays and slow travel and immersing yourselves in the community. And I'd like to get a feel from you guys, if any of you guys have previously done, and it's very interesting because for us living in Quintana Roo, which is a tourism state par excellence, I mean, that is the number one hub in the Americas for tourism, there is a big perception difference from those who are long travelers and those who are actually coming into the hotels as tourists. So for me, I've always drawn a distinction between tourists and travelers. And I'd like to put that on the table and see if anything that pops into mind with that distinction for you. And if there's been shifts in your particular lives from perhaps an initial tourist type traveling that you've done to what you're now experiencing as slow travelers. Anyone?
I think the first time where we experienced that was we were in Ecuador, in the south, very south of Ecuador, and we came to a town in the Valley of Longevity, and it just happened to be almost that was before we actually embarked on the slow travel aspect, and we found we were quickly wearing ourselves out after about 6 weeks of traveling throughout South America, and we were really tired, and we found this town, and we decided we wanted to stay there quite a bit longer. And the more weeks we spent there, the greater distinction we started to see between these different sort of approaches. And the town was so how can I say this as well? It gets back to those cultural aspects and the cultural differences we were talking about before. How, the imposition of westernized values of like we're going in there to help, may not be what these people need at all. And it also seemed to be a little bit of a haven like for economic refugees from the US. And it was interesting, we were standing on the corner of the square, running Plaza de Armas, and there were these two guys from the US, and they were standing there. My son and I were just standing quietly, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm going to come in here, and we're going to build a casino over there because that's what they need here. They need a casino, you know, and we'll make lots of money, you know." And it was quite funny, you know, to see that, and sort of giggling a little bit. But the thing is that I think it's the attitude, I think, that you carry with you in your heart when you go to a place. Your willingness to humble yourself, and because I'm also, my background is I come from immigrants. I'm Australian, but my parents also came from a situation where they had to leave, and funnily enough, you know, yeah, my skin looks white and everything, but I experienced a great amount of racism growing up. You know, I was referred to a very nasty word when I was young. I won't repeat it here, but it was sort of because we were the outsiders. So it gave me a very, you know, formative appreciation for all sorts of different cultures that we were also very, very privileged to see in the inner part of Australia when we travelled through the Anangu, Pichanjara, Yankanjara lands and met with the local and lived with the local Aboriginal people of Australia. And so from that perspective, I think it's that whole thing of humbling yourself enough to say, what is it that you can teach me and how can I contribute back? Because I think of my home country of Australia, I thought if those guys in those ships came and instead of, you know, saying, you know, is this land yours? And naturally the Aboriginal people said, what do you mean yours? We belong to the land. The land doesn't belong to us. And them going, yippee, there's no one living here. Instead of asking that, if they came and said, how have you people lived here for tens of thousands of years in this desolate, hostile sort of place, I can imagine that country would have been just a completely different country today. So they're the types of experiences we seek wherever we go in the communities, you know, to humble ourselves and to try and understand how we can be of service by listening to their stories.
Actually, there was now that you're bringing that up, it reminds me of this last Christmas in our community, which is a small town, Puerto Morelos. We're between Cancun and Playa, and there's a fairly settled group of expats that are there. And this last Christmas, they decided that they were going to do something for the animals. And so they actually did carols, carol singing to ask for donations to give, I think they were doing a spaying clinic or something like that. And for the locals, it was horrible to see, literally, that they were doing this, because during Christmas there was a lot of local families that didn't have enough for their Christmas dinner for their families. And here were these expatriates that were getting money together for the cats and dogs on the streets, which for the Mexican families, when their kids are going hungry, the cats and dogs really aren't all that important, and this was Christmas. And so sometimes when we're able to humble ourselves and actually see that maybe we're going in the wrong direction, that's what helps us in the future to do things differently. And I speak to that from the perspective that I now look back at some of the work that I've done in the past and said, ooh, that was a wrong turn, and ooh, I shouldn't have done it like that, and gee, that was, again, I passed for a Canadian, and when I was in Papua New Guinea, like yourself, although having gone to Canada, I also had a lot of racism. In Papua New Guinea, I'm white. And so I absolutely see that in myself, and it has been a very humbling situation to now look back at some of the volunteer, well-intentioned stuff that I've done in the past, and now read some of that and say, ooh, I wish I'd changed that or done that in another way. And I was wondering if any of you guys have any experiences like that have shifted the way that you now enter these communities. Any concrete experiences?
Sort of. So it's not exactly answering your question, but it gave us a lot to consider. The first year Miro and I were traveling, we volunteered in Belize at a cat clinic, a cat rescue. Sorry, not clinic. And it was on Key Cocker on the island, and we lived there well, it was a house that was dedicated to creating a rescue for cats, and then it was dogs, and they had a dog too that was rescued. And we were there for about 2 months, living on that island, working every day to help maintain these animals that were rescued. And the question of why were these animals why did they need to be there? And here I am with Miro. He was 10 years old at the time, and the learning experience about how this rescue center came into practice was there at one point was a bag of kittens that was thrown into the water and they were drowning, and the woman who lived there was of Latino or Hispanic background. She lived there on the family property and took the cats out of the water. And the rest of the island, the majority of the island, are Afro-Caribbean. And the belief is that these animals steal the spirits of their children. So here we are, two very different cultures, same country, same little island. And there are these sort of competing belief systems. Here we are, as Westerners, walking in. Of course, we want to help the cats, right? Actually, I didn't want to clean up after cats for 2 months, and I don't even like cats, but that's what we did. But beyond that, we got to really sit back and open up and expand what worldviews mean. Because from the perspective of those that lived on the island, cats were soul stealers. From the perspective of the family that is from the Hispanic background in Belize, which has roots from Guatemala and of course then Spain and the mixture of all the different cultures, that was just not acceptable. That, it's a conflicting background. And then we got to stand back and look at how that affected us. We're cleaning up after cats, but we're in the middle of this belief conflict. And there was no way of ignoring it. There was no way of pretending that it didn't exist. We lived on this island for 2 months, and Miro played with the children from both sides. And so there was a different understanding from his perspective. And then when he played with the boys, from one different culture, he had to play it off that he wasn't volunteering there. And so it was this really, it changed us, but it also gave us space to consider the worldviews and what impact our footsteps, especially there on that island, were having. So we did affect the culture. It didn't really answer your question.
No, it did.
But, okay.
It definitely did. That was a fantastic answer. Do any of you guys have anything else?
Well, I'll say something from the other side of the coin, I guess, as a recipient of aid. So, like I said, we're fairly comfortable up until age 12, but there were times that when my mom was a single mom and we went on benefits. We had free lunches. We had, I wouldn't be here today if there weren't some social support. Certainly not the, success story I've had with my life. So I'll say just as a recipient, there's definitely feelings that I hope you guys can take as lessons that, the Midwest in particular has a lot of that independent, do-it-on-your-own culture. And so any need is shamed. So there's almost that magical thinking of God has put you there. If, you've either done something wrong or He has determined that you should be in need or something like that. So people try to avoid people who are in need like lepers. They don't want that to rub off on them. And there's also that sense that they're not necessarily aware of the larger systemic reasons people are in need. There's a lot of sexism involved because it's often the women who are in need. And so it's shamed. It's very heavily shamed. If you're in need, it's because you're lazy, you're a bum, you didn't go out and work hard like the rest of us, right? So, that was always, even in the littlest things, from the way that she would call attendance for us to come up and get our free lunch ticket or sign in or everything. So just that awareness of, as you go in to do service, And we've talked about that. I mean, just not coming at it from a point of privilege or whatever, but really having that compassion that, you may not ever understand or become aware because they may not share with you what got them into that position where they needed need. But if you can go into it with absolute acceptance and at least consciousness that you don't know, you have no idea, and so you don't have the right to have any judgment because you don't have the information to even form a judgment, is a good way. And so I think I haven't myself gone into volunteering and then changed, but I think the reason I didn't is because I had experienced it myself firsthand.
I'd really like to add to that, because the very first part of our journey, as I said, was doing this project called Energetic Exchange to try and help meet the needs of people. We thought in the States there'll be lots. And we met with a lot of communities. We got involved with communities and lots of university-educated people. And they were going, what you're doing sounds a whole lot like socialism. And they equated socialism not to a safety net or or something, as you said, could be provided and really, provides an absolute need, but something that had a stigma associated with it, that had this really like, yeah, that's right. And also the other side of that coin was that's like, well, wasn't that communism thing, and you're like, no, it wasn't totalitarianism governments. It's providing those sort of basic needs for people to help each other and for people to actually come together and learn from each other and to accept one another. And we got real slaps in the face there, so that sort of changed us. But it also changed us when we had the privilege of living with, the Aboriginal people of Australia on the Anangu Pichanjara Yankunytjara lands. And they experience the same sort of thing on a daily basis. I mean, there's been movies made of this. There's been a whole stolen generation where, the anthropologists came in and said, oh, well, we can fix you. We just need to take your children from you and educate them in the right ways of society. And we all watched this movie, called Rabbit Proof Friends. Yeah? Right? A lot of people seen that movie. And they were like, wow, isn't that bad that they did that? They're still doing it today, but not in the same way. They're coming into the community, like, what can we do to help you, And the community says, well, and they go, oh, that sounds great. No, I still haven't told you. No, that's great. Let me get that down, right? I'll be back, and never see them again. And that was one of the great frustrations of us even being able to share stories with these people, because they weren't really prepared to share anything with anybody coming in anymore because they'd had it up to here. So those things really transformed us into seeing that if we look at each other and it gets back to that humbling ourselves and understanding each other's story, we really can get to relate to each other and know each other from that perspective.
That is beautiful. Thank you, and I love the relationship between doing the same kinds of work in the first world being perceived absolutely radically opposite way as doing the exact same thing in the third world. Thank you. I actually was about to turn this over to the audience, and I got a request, so I'm going to start taking questions from you guys. I want to get a little more of a perspective of what's on your minds, and here's the first.
Hello, everyone. Mine is probably more of a comment. Can't tell I'm black. Hello. And so my perspective growing up in the U.S. or just growing up in general was just a little different. So there's two things, and I have friends of all cultures, and I grew up single parent mom. Pretty much every man she was with beat the crap out of her. So it's not out of the country that this stuff is happening. It's everywhere. And two things that I've noticed over the past few years, or probably about the past 8 years of having friends who are not people of color or white or whatever you'd like to call. Two things that I want to point out. One is about privilege, the other is about the word of giving back. One, since the newest election, I've done what I call emancipate a lot of white people. Because I want you, honestly, to feel with your hearts and not with your guilt and shame of what people have done before you. It is not your job, it is not your right, it is not your responsibility to take on what other people have done because they've lost their way. So as you're going through things, give with your heart. Don't give back. I don't give back to anyone, but I give. And I give with my heart, and I give with a motivation of love and compassion, not shame, not guilt, not I want to help you, not you need me. Where you need me is for me to be my most authentic self. And then where I give is where I am best and not where I believe you're best. And you have a right to take what I have to offer or let it be. In my town alone, most people it's a slightly mixed town compared to many other cities in New Jersey. But many of the people who are the most oppressed that I've found in mine are my white friends, because they are carrying the guilt and the shame of people that have gone long hundreds of years ago. Many of the reasons why this is continuing is because of that guilt and shame that you're feeling. And it is not helping you to hold that in your bodies, because when you go to a place, you're carrying it with you. When I go to a place, because I came from, I suppose people would call it poverty, I come with freedom. I come with, wow, I am fortunate to have come from people who were slaves, and my grandmother and great-grandmother cleaning floors and instilling me the importance of uplifting your head, not looking down. So when I go to a place, I see other loving beings who just want to live with just the same rights. It is not a privilege to be on this planet at all. That's the part. I hope you feel the love. It might sound a little, but it's because I sit here and I feel a lot of pain. I can feel the pain pouring off of people when they have this idea that when they go to a place that they have to feel bad about their so-called privileges. You have a right to live happy and be free everywhere you are, whatever your color, whatever your gender is. So the best you can give is by clearing up all that stuff that's been oppressing you. Many people are here because of how they felt oppressed in schools, as parents, as this or that. So we are all coming with the same experiences of someone telling us how to live. So this is where we share all of this. And you aren't privileged because of your skin color. Someone has given you that belief, but deep down inside you feel ashamed for that, which means that you don't feel privileged, because you can't feel guilt and privilege at the same time. So check where your motivation is and work on yourself and grow from love. And that will help everyone. I help people in my town, whether they're wealthy or whether they're not. I give free tours. I'm sort of the witch doctor in the town. People knock on my door for probiotics, and I get messages from people out of the country. How do I keep my child healthy without vaccines and antibiotics? I'm not lady. And I give. People say, how much can I pay you? I don't need your money. When I met my husband, I was living on Wall Street, just like he was, and I had made my way. And I felt good about that. I didn't feel like I never had a handout. I had people giving me a hand up. My mother always said, get that hand out of, turn it from this way and turn it to this. Not this, not help me. It is, how can I keep uplifting myself? So I just hope you get the part of my heart that's trying to extend to you that you have done nothing wrong by wanting to experience the world and people and be curious and grow. There's nothing wrong with that. So when you go to a place and you just want to give, if it's coming from that place that's undone, you're not helping. You're not helping yourself, and you're not helping anyone else. And it is okay to go to a place and not want to give back. If you are truly there standing in a place of power, that is what you bring, and that is what people feel. When I go through places, I bring me full of power and love, and I smile and I get to know people. I practice my awful Spanish in the coffee shop, and now I've made friends with them. But that's what I bring. And I tip because, well, if they were nice enough to suffer through my Spanish, they should be tipped for that. But that's, have fun with life. It is a privilege only that we breathe every day. After that, live life happily, and then everything you do from that will absolutely help people with that happiness you bring, not the weight that you bring. And if you don't know how to lift that up, I have many ways, and I can help you. If you want to send me messages, I have all sorts of personal development and subconscious belief pattern changes. I'm your girl. I'm doing something for free tomorrow, so please come to my table. Or find me. I'll do it in the corner. I'll do it in the bathroom. It doesn't matter. But anyway, so that's what I'm giving to all of you. And I hope that that's helpful.
We have time for one more question from the audience, or one more thing. If anybody has a thought that they'd like to share about any of this, any experiences that you'd like to put on the table and share with everybody.
Just one. I mean, it's what you just said. I want to rewatch that off my just one thing. My son and I went to volunteer at Standing Rock this year, and there was this. We went through an orientation for non-natives, and basically we were told that in any meeting, all natives speak first, people of color speak second, and white people speak last. And if you're not here for at least 3 months, pretty much don't speak. And that definitely changed me. But it's for the better. I'm still processing, but it's very much about privilege. And everything you said, I'm like, whew, I need to be liberated more. But there is a privilege, there's an understanding of letting people that haven't been empowered because of where they came from take that power and realize that we need to step back rather than saying we're going to fix you, because we're going to fix you is taking power away. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that. I feel like I want to learn so much from you about everything you just said, but also somehow reconcile that with privilege of what exists. So
I can help you reconcile.
I can't wait.
Very important.
Actually, tying those two things together, I think ultimately, and it talks a lot to what everybody on the panel said, it's about recognizing where our heart's actually at, seeing where our intentions are actually coming from, being aware of that privilege, but also being aware of, like, as she was saying, that it's not necessarily your fault what your great-great-great-great-grandfather did and the position that you're in. Just simply acknowledging how others are seeing us, how we're perceiving them, how there is that distinction, and what we can do to make us all humans in the end. Because in the end, that's what it is. And I think that's kind of, if that sums everything up in a way, it's a recognizing and an understanding and an acknowledgement of where we're at and what we're putting forward.
I know you said one last one. Okay, I'll try to keep it really short. So my background is in third world development, and I spent extensive time abroad. What I realized was, and some of the panelists spoke to that, was it really became very heavy on me about how am I imposing my will, and is that even welcomed, in many ways. And I had a very deep reaction to that, and said I pulled out of third world development, and I said the way that I thought that I could best serve was to teach those that I was from. So I wanted to expose the United States. We're very xenophobic, and I wanted to then become a storyteller, but only for my story. And my story was of what I had seen, and my story was what I had experienced. And when we travel, and I agree so much with you, at least I try, only to come in open, only to offer me, because that's really all I have to offer. And what we do as a tremendous service as global travelers is create stories, and we become storytellers. And storytelling is a very deep, traditional way of learning. And that is, I surrender myself to that is all that I can offer, is my story. And what I'm trying to do with my children, because I do carry this thing like, okay, and of course, my father just Facebooked me, which triggered me totally. He's like, so what did you learn about the Mayan ruins? And when did it happen? And what were the dates? And what, and it was like a test suddenly. And I was like, oh my God, okay, I better get back and have the kids read something, because I know they'll just, when you ask them, they're just going to be like, yeah, it was great. I know that's going to happen. Because it's not going to germinate. It's going to have to germinate for a while. They may not understand how it affected them for a few years, and I'm not going to test them at the end of the day about it. So all I can do for my children is expose them and hope for them that they too will become storytellers.
Okay, no announcements. So thank you guys all for being here. I hope that was enjoyable for everybody, and we'll see you back after lunch.